Why are we losing?
We're losing because there are always moments when we lose.
See, that feels very fatalistic to me.
It doesn't feel fatalistic to me. It feels like the truth. I mean, and let me express what I mean. I'm Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm the writer. I'm the individual, right? But I am part of something larger, and I've always felt myself as part of something larger.
I think the notion that in order for Democrats to win, they have to expand the tent is true on its face. The problem is the expansion of the tent only goes in the rightward direction. They do not want to expand the tent, even from the rightward direction, with considerations of the economic harm that all Americans are experiencing. I have no issue with making Republicans, former Republicans, vote for the Democratic Party. As a matter of fact, I want them to vote for whatever the left position party is in this country. That is how you win. The problem is you don't get them to vote for the left flank of the party by becoming more racist. You get them to vote for the left flank party by offering them things that they want. And for a lot of Americans, for a lot of Democrats, especially for a lot of liberals, they think, no, we can't do that. We just must not do that. We must not ever consider that. That is crazy to me. Of course we want racists and transphobes to no longer be racist or transphobic. And the way to do that is not by becoming the lighter version of the racist and transphobic party. The way to do that is by offering them shit that they want. That's why you gotta focus on the issues. That's why you have to push for issues. That's why you have to say, I am going to be a fighter for the shit that you care about. I'm going to improve your goddamn material circumstances. That's it. People make these calculations every day. You have to present them with something that they want, and you have to communicate that you are going to be a fighter for those issues. This is what Democrats never do. They are the good things are not possible party. And that's a horrible party to be. That's a horrible position to be in. Because on the other side, you got we're going to shit up party. You got the you're angry and you're right to be angry party. And in the absence of any sort of counter narrative against that, when you cannot be well defined on issues that will greatly improve the living standards of every single American, they can just present you as a silly bitch party that only cares about giving bottom surgeries to Guatemalan transgender prisoners. That's it. That's how you lost. That's why you lost the goddamn election. And it's so frustrating to see people like Ezra Klein, who do have a lot of motion in the Democratic Party, still present this alternative that, like, we just simply didn't go right enough. We didn't go right enough to win these voters. You cannot win culture war issues against the Republican Party on the boundaries that they've created. They made the playing game so they can win. They can always go further right. You can't outflank the Republicans on racism. The question also remains, should you outflank the Republicans on racism? I say no. It blows my mind that there are still so many well-educated liberals who keep pushing this argument. Like, we got to expand the tent to the racists. It's like, yeah, we do, but just not in the way that you think. You get them on your side by offering them things that they need. This is how democracy works. If there was a left flank party that was simply saying, dude, Medicare fraud, that's what I'm about. I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to give that to you no matter what. A lot less people would find themselves being singularly focused on transphobia because they would recognize that that shit doesn't actually move the needle. That shit doesn't actually improve their lives at all. The problem at the core of the Democratic Party, okay? This is why they lose elections. When you cave to your opposition's framing on culture war narratives, you just legitimize their argument.
I have a tradition. I have ancestry. I have heritage. What that means is that I do whatever I do within the time that I have in my life, whatever time I'm gifted with. And much of what I do is built on what other people did before then. And then after that, I leave the struggle where I leave it. And then hopefully it's in a better place. Oftentimes it's not. That's the history, in fact. And then my progeny pick it up and they keep it going. I am descended from people who in their lifetime fought with all their might for the destruction of chattel slavery in this country. And they never saw it. They never saw it. In my personal belief system, they died in, defeat, in darkness, And so I guess the privilege that I draw out of this, the honor that I draw out of this, is not that things will necessarily be better in my lifetime, but that I will make the contribution that I am supposed to make. The fact of the matter is, as horrifying as, that the Charlie Kirk was. And as horrifying as the feeling is, this moment that we are in, an era of political violence, and I don't want to sound flip here.
Not to be mean, but Ezra's problem is whiteness. Oh, dude. I mean, not to get all like 2016 BuzzFeed with it, but like, no, 100%. Because like, I have noticed that like the broad majority of like the liberal commentariat that had Ezra style reflections on Charlie Kirk's background and Charlie Kirk's political output do unironically come from that same that same inability to address like the dehumanization that came along with Charlie Kirk's narratives. I mean, it's true. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't white people who also had the same opinion of Charlie Kirk as Ta-Nehisi does. Of course, there are, myself included. But like, it is clear that it's an inherently reactionary tendency to like refuse to think about the impact that this has on groups of marginalized communities that you are so easily discarding. Okay, that's what this is.
Political violence is the norm for Black experience in this country. It just is. I don't even mean like the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King variety of it, right? Which is the norm too. You would be hard pressed to have a conversation with a Black person in this country that is a descendant of slavery and not have them be able to reach maybe right here or to tell you themselves, look, my uncle, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, they lived in a small town in Mississippi, in Tennessee, in Alabama. They got into some sort of dispute with a white man, and either they were or we had to run. Political violence runs through us. It is our heritage. Is that good? No. Do we valorize it? Absolutely not. Do we minimize it? Absolutely not. But a life free of it is not a thing that's really in reach in my time.
Sometimes I think that having a historical scope that wide can make the present too deterministic. So to me, I look at the last, 8, 12 years. Mm-hmm. And what I see having happened is we, the coalition I am in, the things I believe in, lost ground. And people determinedly worked to make that so. Charlie Kirk worked to make that so successfully, right? I think that when he began going to college campuses and putting out a sign at a table, he was eventually going to build was not obvious, right? I think he worked. I think he was a successful political actor. And I think that from when in 2016, we lost to Donald Trump the first time, very narrowly, won the popular vote, right? And then in 2020, we almost lost to him and began seeing we were losing a bunch of voters we thought we were fighting for, right? Losing more working class voters, losing non-white voters, right? Something was changing, but we won, so okay. And then in 2024, we really got our asses handed to us. We let a much more dangerous form of politics fully erupt. I think that reflects strategic decisions they made. I think it reflects decisions we made. So I think for me, it's not enough to say we lost, there are backlashes, sometimes you lose. I think it requires like a very fundamental rethinking, like a disciplined strategic rethinking of what have we been doing? Why are people preferring this to us? And I do think that is like, it opens up into something more that I think that.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Nothing he said is wrong. What's wrong is his solution. Yeah, of course, in the aftermath of a major political defeat against a party that has historically in the last 3 decades never won a popular election victory with one exception. Of course, it's important to reflect on it. You're not really saying much when you say that, though. You're saying that there must be an autopsy conducted. Yeah, no shit. The issue that I have with Ezra Klein is not that he wants to conduct an autopsy on how the Democrats lost. The issue that I have with Ezra Klein is that his autopsy is wrong.
I think in many ways we've stopped doing politics. We've written a lot of people off. And in writing them off, we are losing and we are unable to protect ourselves, unable to protect them, just unable to make good change in the world.
Can you say more about that writing them off, please?
Yeah. Why don't we start it here if we want to talk about writing them off? I've been obsessing recently for a piece I've been writing about the Hillary Clinton deplorables comment, and I want to play it.
To just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
She was right. She was fucking right. She was goddamn right. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'm joking. You shouldn't. Sometimes even if you're right, you shouldn't say those things. Also, especially if you're someone as patently unlikable as Hillary Clinton, you should never say those things.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people like that. And he has lifted them up. He has given voice to their websites that used to only have 11,000 people. Now have 11 million. He tweets and retweets their offensive, hateful, mean-spirited rhetoric. Now some of those folks, they are irredeemable, but thankfully they are not American.
What do you think when you hear that?
She probably shouldn't have said it.
Do you think it's true?
I mean, it's probably not how I would say it, but, you know, I mean, there are things that I would say, you know. I probably would say what I said earlier, you know, in the interview about the force of, and I mean, as I've been saying this probably since as long as we've been talking, you know, but I just want to be clear about something. I shouldn't be running for president of the United States. You know what I mean? And my expectations for the rhetoric of writers, intellectuals, journalists, et cetera, is very, very different than what the expectation should be for people who you know, expect to hold office.
Yeah, so I agree with, right? I think that there are different jobs in all this. But when I say we began writing people off, I think that something that happened, and I think something I saw in this debate, but kind of like underneath it, was that the work of politics, of bridging over a lot of profound, fundamental, moral disagreements, I think became somewhat diminished. It began to seem like, in many cases, a betrayal to people. The tent shrunk. The people I feel more comfortable with wielding power shrunk. And I think what Clinton was saying there came from somewhere. It came from, you know, the sort of culture that had emerged. It got worse over time. And then I think it really contributed to us losing. And meanwhile, this is why when I say, like in that initial piece, there was something that I respected in what Kirk was doing, like going in, having debates, using them opportunistically. A lot of people throwing back at me that, oh, he wasn't debating to find truth. Of course he wasn't debating to find the truth. He was doing politics. He was trying to persuade people. And I've watched on our side, not opportunistic engagement, but a lot of, I would say, counterproductive disengagement.
The other side of the story about like writing people off that I find to be so silly, because this is like intra-liberal conversations taking place. But like, there is also a level of punishment that liberals issue their own popular politicians that like Republicans simply don't. There is no expectation from a Republican politician to actually go back on that. As a matter of fact, many people go, no, hell yeah, say more of it, King. Like, at least with Hillary Clinton, when she's saying that thing that Ta-Nehisi says she shouldn't have said as someone running for office, she's writing people off of ideals that they represent and not like some other inalienable trait or characteristic.
But would you like to see one of us put up a sign outside of, say, some white evangelical church in Alabama, debate me on abortion, and then use that content to say such and such smashes, you know what I mean, church parishioner here, such and such owns church parishioner?
I would like to see.
Would you like
I would like to see people
on
our side. Yeah, go to evangelical churches, go to places that feel unfriendly, have conversations, and look. I put things up on YouTube. They're fairly successful, not the best of the business. And I don't use, you know, capital letters destroys in them. I think you can do it more aligned to hopefully our value structure, our political approach, our political aesthetic, at least the one that I believe in. I shouldn't overuse the term our here. But we weren't doing that either.
Bro, he wants destiny. That's what he wants.
No, we weren't. I know, for instance, I have. Like, I know for instance, I don't know if it's on YouTube anymore, but I received an invitation, for instance, I think about when I went up to West Point and I had to go there and talk about Between the World and Me. I had to challenge them very, very directly about what it meant to have, at that time, Confederate memorials up there and to, you know, talk about, you know, a Confederate, I can't remember, you know, what the motto is exactly, but basically it's an argument against lying and what it meant, you know, to have that there and have those grand historical lies. I mean, we had a really, really great interaction. I don't know that, you know, I know everybody didn't agree with me. It would never occur to me, and I think it actually insults the dialogue to take that and say, Ta-Nehisi owns West Point cadets.
Do you really not recognize the kind of culture I'm talking about here? Like, really?
I'm sorry, say more. No,
That's also not the same, because the comparison that Ezra Klein presents, once again, is a conflation of ideals, ideology, and characteristics that are unchanging, okay? Blackness and the concept of being black is not a quality that you can wash off, is not a quality that you can change about yourself, whereas being an evangelical who believes that abortion is murder is a quality that you can reason with or potentially change the minds of people on. This is a fundamental asymmetry that exists in this left-right dynamic that I despise. Like, Charlie Kirk wasn't bad because he was just saying that, like, his economic worldview was about, like, deregulation and more deregulation and more tax breaks for the wealthy. That wasn't the bad aspect of his doing politics the right way. The bad aspect of it was he would just consistently churn out propaganda that dehumanized marginalized populations, dehumanized people who were just like basically not white and not Christian men. Okay, that's what it is. And this was conducted on prosecuting inalienable characteristics of people.
I mean, what do you mean?
I think there really was a move towards the sort of approach Clinton is offering here. I think we began to pull back. I really do.
But maybe it would help if you define the
I will define the we,
like,
right? Because I actually think this is a very hard thing about talking about political parties, because they're diffuse,
right?
It's a lot of people doing a lot of things all at once. But I think of the huge backlash to Bernie Sanders for going on Joe Rogan's show because Rogan was transphobic, right? Such a big backlash that when I defended him, I became myself a Twitter trending topic.
Right.
To Elizabeth Warren for going on Bill Maher's show. Bill Maher's Islamophobic, right? There were protests at Netflix when they brought on Dave Chappelle, right? I think there was a politics of content moderation that took hold that was more about enforcing boundaries of what, were and were not ideas we should be engaged with than about engaging them, again, even if opportunistically. And when I go back to something I was saying to you a minute ago, I am in a process right now thinking we failed, right? We lost. The loss is having terrible consequences. What do we need to rethink? How do we become competitive again in places where we're not? And I think there is something in here. Do people feel like even if they...
We are competitive. Once again, his examples that he presented are not even ones that I disagree with. You should go on any and every platform as long as you can be consistent and clear with your vision. I don't disagree with this. And I think the content moderation aspect of this is silly. It's fruitless. It's annoying. It pisses even your own allies off. The problem, of course, is that I was never the guy who was like, how dare Bernie talk to Joe Rogan? I was the guy yelling at the fucking liberals for doing that. I've never been the guy who's like, well, the Bernie bros. I was the Bernie bro. So it's not even something that I disagree with Ezra Klein on, but I do disagree with the way that he presented Charlie Kirk, and I do disagree with the way that he's presenting the concept of spirited debate, even in this moment, even if it is to create a successful vehicle of propaganda.
Disagree with us on some things, that they have a place with us. And my experience going around the country talking to people, I've been on a lot of, right of center podcasts lately, is that, rightly or wrongly, like what they took and something that really empowered Trump in the last election was a sense that they didn't. And like we were against them. And if so, they were going to be against us. And I think that's in the end doing politics badly.
So I think two things. I think about how much you argued that like Biden shouldn't run again. What if he doesn't earlier and you have a Democrat who wins the presidency? Like the other big explainers that I can see for it, you know what I mean? That don't feel so diffuse. The other thing is, and I know you don't want to talk historically, but, when you say fatalism, like I take that to mean that what's the point of fighting? I think that misapprehends the philosophy here. It's not that you know what's going to happen. It's not that you know Donald Trump is going, it's that you don't underestimate what you are up against. It's actually kind of the opposite. I mean, man, you yourself wrote these articles about how high the level of racial resentment was. That this country, or some segment of it, was so, as the term was used at the time, racially resentful. I call it racist, but that it flooded down to Barack Obama's dog, Bo. Mm-hmm. That's not a small amount of power. Like that's not a small force. And so, just really quickly getting back to Charlie Kirk, like I would watch those clips of him saying those things, man, and I would see how people would cheer and get charged by it. People get activated by hate. It's a very, very, very strong force. And so I don't think it requires you to feel that you will eventually lose. On the contrary, I think it requires you to feel that even if you do lose, you have this kind of steadfastness, you know what I mean, to keep going.
In some ways more in Trump's first term, but I see it now too, which is the worse from your perspective, my perspective, the other side gets, the more people want their reaction to sort of be, and their strategy to be emotionally consonant with how they're feeling about it. Because these people are so bad, there can be no quarter. Right, I had somebody we both know. I'll say an eminent academic of one form or another. Email me after these pieces and just say to me like, "We are not on the same side anymore." Right, the what I was doing was too far. Right, like we are just not on the same side. If I could say these things, I have a feeling right now that we are closer to genuine national rupture. Certainly, been in my lifetime. Right, the idea that this experiment that America could topple into something else, into something much worse, into some kind of new extended regime, feels very real to me. I remember when I was on the Why We're Polarized book tour.
I interviewed you for it.
You did, yeah. The end of that book is this recitation of what happened in the 1960s, the political nations, the violence in the streets, like what the state was doing, what was happening. But on the book tour, what I would say is my nightmare scenario, that level of violence and fracture with these kinds of parties, where politics is not for all of its flaws, a calming force, because like the views are diffuse across the two parties, but an accelerant. And I think we're much more now in the world I was fearing. Okay, so I think it should make you think, okay, what does some kind of de-escalation before you get to rupture look like? But the other is that there are a lot of people who live in places we used to win not that long ago. So I've been thinking about Obamacare. When Obamacare passes, there are Democratic senators in Arkansas, in Louisiana, in West Virginia, in Missouri, in Indiana, in North Carolina, in South Dakota, in North Dakota. And I've been thinking that I think for a lot of us, to twist the line about capitalism, it has become easier to imagine the end of the country than winning a Senate seat in Missouri.
I can't believe you just bastardized the Mark Fisher quote. That's crazy. Bastardizing the Mark Fisher quote to talk about the inability of Democrats winning fucking red states is crazy. Okay, let's just continue.
Arkansas. I think that's a problem.
Yeah. So I think a couple things about that. First of all, I just want to bring in the
okay, everybody. One thing that you fundamentally misunderstand about Ezra Klein liberalism, is that in many ways he's actually not dissimilar to the way that Destiny presents himself, even though Destiny is a fucking mercenary. He doesn't really give a shit about anything. But for Ezra Klein, the epitome is letting the Democratic Party win. When he says, oh, we have to let the Democratic Party win, we have to do anything in our power to let the Democratic Party win. What he's trying to say is because when the Democratic Party wins, and I'm sure he'll explain it in a second, the Tonnets and Codes, it's still better than when the Republicans win. That's what his argument is. So everything that actually plays a role in undermining the chances of the Democrats winning is actually wrong and bad. If the Democrats are going further and further to the right, at least they're not going to be as bad as the Republicans are. That's a problem. That is an issue. That is at the heart of my disagreement with someone like Ezra Klein, is that while marginal harm reduction narratives are theoretically true, this presents itself as a trap in the Overton window, shifting further and further to the right as the Democrats capitulate the right-wing framing on all these issues. So that's number one. And number two, you usually end up losing anyway because it's not a good fucking way to present yourself. And we just lost this last election on those boundaries.
Historical perspective, not that long ago, I can remember when Obama won, and I believe you would remember this too. And there were all of these pieces about the end of conservatism and the end of the Republican Party. You don't know how it's going to go. Nobody really. It doesn't mean you shouldn't think about how it's going to go. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but no one really. I mean, again,
and in 2005, there were all these pieces about the end of the Democratic Party.
Yes, it was.
Right, Democrats had lost touch with the heartland.
Yeah.
Right, they were never going to get it back.
That's right. And so I think it's always like important to keep that in the background. Look, I have, just in terms of bridging gaps and everything, I have a basic level of respect that I accord to everybody. You know what I mean? I want to say what I have to say. I don't want to shrink back from it. You know what I mean? But I do think on a basic level, there's a respect that has to be had for people that I disagree with, right? At the same time, I recognize that part of my audience, and I would say an important part of my audience, is people who have never enjoyed that respect. You know what I mean? People who, in fact, are subjects of the kind of hate that Charlie Kirk was harvesting. I can't ever, A, contribute to making them feel like they've been abandoned, and B, I can't ever stand by and watch somebody do that. And in the name of unity or whatever, act like that's not happening, because there are real consequences. And so it's like, when I read his words towards trans people, Jesus, when I read, you know what I mean, the language towards Haitians specifically, which was very, very, Haitians will become your masters if you don't elect Trump. I mean, this is very, very familiar to me. It's at the core of this country. And so I feel like for Haitian immigrants that are in, Ohio, who are living under the weight of this, for trans kids who, you know what I mean, are dealing with, being, I don't even want to use the term bully, beaten up, attacked, threatened. You know what I mean? It's very, very important to me, given the post I have, to say, I see you, but also, this dude was wrong. And I'm all for unifying, I'm all for bridging gaps, but not at the expense of my neighbor's humanity. I just can't.
I think the thing we go to there, right? Not at the expense of my neighbor's humanity.
He's like, well, I can. Well, let me tell you how I can. Oh, don't worry, I can. Hold on, I'll explain.
Because I've gotten a lot of that in email, right? Like, how am I supposed to talk to these people? How am I supposed to deal with these people who are denying my humanity?
I'm not against talking to them about it. I'll talk to you very clearly.
Yeah, sure.
I have no problem with that.
I guess the place where, I'm not even 100% sure if we disagree, if you just like sort of see a role differently, right? I think that in losing as badly as we have imperiled trans people terribly.
Yes.
Politics is for power.
Joe Biden did that.
Politics is for power.
He's doing it. He's doing exactly what I said he was going to do. He's going to tell you that, and by the way, this is a wrong statement that he's going to deliver, but don't you think things would be better for trans people right now if Kamala Harris, after making concessions about transphobia and leaning into anti-trans narratives, if she had won, don't you think things would be better for trans people as opposed to right now? The reason why this is wrong is twofold. Number one, at that point, all you've done is, once again, concede to the right-wing framing on trans people presenting some outsized harm to the American population. It's not only incorrect, but it's a harmful narrative, and you've leaned into it. And in that process of leaning into it, you have normalized it. You have legitimized the claims of your opponent. Number two, your opponent, in the aftermath of that recognition, will just turn around and say, see, these fucking pro-trans losers even recognize I'm right. Vote for me. So not only do you look hypocritical, but you end up fucking losing for that reason. Because you can never defeat the Republicans on hate mongering. You just can't. Okay? The second part of the story that is also objectionable which I have not even waited for his statement, by the way, and I'm already fucking arguing against what I know he's going to say with my heart of fucking hearts because I've heard it so many goddamn times from other liberals, is that Joe Biden was president when Republicans were aggressively hitting the anti-trans narratives and also successfully implementing anti-trans legislation at the state legislature level already, building the fucking framework for what came next. And in the absence of fighting back against that, the administration also allowed this to happen in some very meaningful ways. Anyway, let's hear what Ezra has to say, though.
And so I think that the question I am just genuinely struggling with isn't how to have like a great kumbaya moment. But I think it is taking seriously that something we're doing is not working. I mean, I had Sarah McBride, who's the first trans member of Congress on the show. And, you know, we were talking about every single survey you can offer on like trans rights has gone in the wrong direction the past couple of years, right? We've just begun to lose that argument terribly. And that has put people in real danger. So I take your point when you say, look, I want people to feel seen in my writing. And I want people to feel seen in my writing and my podcasting. But I think the place I'm trying to push towards is I think that there is a diminishment of the political coalition building we now need to do because we have come to the view that a pretty wide variety of people are in some ways kind of deplorables. I think it's weakened a bit in the last couple of years.
I would never use that language. Jesus Christ.
But
like that's not, so when you ask me about that Hillary Clinton, that's what, like, I would never say it like that.
That's great. I think it's good that you wouldn't say it like that, but and I'm not saying
I don't even think that, by the way. Like, right. I don't even focus on people. Look, I am at war with certain ideologies and ideas. And I want them expunged. I want to turn them into phrenology. That's what I want. But I don't want the people. You know what I mean?
Not a timely reference, because if there's one ideology that was destroyed thoroughly, dismantled intellectually, that is making a major comeback, it is probably phrenology. So, oops, phrenology is back.
Ouch. Like when you start talking about who people are and their bones, like that.
So in a way, I'm not sure. I mean, in a way, I think we're saying something not too dissimilar here. I guess the place where I felt a lot of pushback, and maybe this was not your pushback, right?
Except for cop phrenology, that's a real study. That's a real scientific study, as you guys know.
Was, you know, the first piece I can just sort of, like, I accept that there's a disagreement on, like, what to do in the 24 hours after a death. Like, you feel like I was whitewashing the guy, and I felt like I was sort of... Yeah, I know you do. I know you do.
It's very upsetting.
I know you do. The second piece I did, which I think you saw, was more about this question of, what are we going to do living here in sort of two types of disagreement, right? One with a right that where Charlie Kirk has become sort of the center of it, right? He's not unusual for the MAGA coalition. He's a sort of uniting force within it and the kind of things he believed in the way he did his politics. And then two, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to be here with people who are like halfway there, right? What does it mean to be in this political community together? What do you think about that question?
About how to live together? Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's a truth. You know what I mean? I think it's it's a foregone, like we are. I really, really believe that, you know? There's no real choice about this. You know, I'm not renouncing my American citizenship. They're not renouncing their American citizenship. So this then, you know, as far as I'm concerned, is a contest of ideas and narratives. Again, all I can go to is my role as a writer. And my role as a writer is to state things as clearly as I possibly can, to make them in such a way that they haunt, to state truths, and to reinforce probably the animating notion of my politics. And that is that all humanity is equal and is worthy of that. You know, and I actually think all of the sort of political and policy positions are, you know, that I probably find myself in sympathy with are attempting to affect that, you know, in the real world. And so, and again, I'm putting aside your piece, but I'm just you know, thinking about the moment we're in. When I hear or see people who are honored and commemorated in such a way so that they almost become a national religious figure, and then I see their content, and I see that their content is actively destructive to humanity, I have to draw a line there. Like, I think, like, for me, like, the bigger question is where are the lines? You know what I mean? And I think there's no problem with saying, listen, you can't hurl epithets at people. You're out if you do that. I'm sorry. Look, you want to have a debate about whether we should have affirmative action, you know, in colleges? I'm here for it. You want to have a debate?
What does it mean to be on the other side of the line?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
What is it? So once somebody's on the other side of the line, right? What does that mean for you?
For instance, once you think it's okay. No. I'm trying to make this concrete.
Yeah, no, I am too.
Yes.
Once, for whatever the definition of the line is,
right?
What does it mean for you for somebody to be on the other side of it, right? Not somebody who just died,
right?
But somebody still living,
right? If you think it is okay to dehumanize people, then conversation between you and I is probably not possible.
And so, what do you do with the fact that so many people think that is okay?
I think what you try to do is again, this is the difference, right? Like, I don't necessarily have the crystal ball to say that in this time, I'm going to be able to convince a majority of people that, for instance, let's just take the thing that's hot right now. Trans folks are human beings and deserve humanity. Although I think most people know that you shouldn't say what he said. Like, that shit is rude. It's just rude to talk to people like that. And I think most people know that. So it's something.
I can't believe I'm actually finding myself in between both of these thinkers in this issue. I believe that if society, let's say tomorrow society is a Nazi society, okay? And we are functioning within a Nazi society, and that might be actually a lot closer than you think. In that situation, there is value to addressing the dehumanizing rhetoric, okay? There's value to doing other things as well, but it's certain there's a value to, at least when you are trying to win favor with those in the margins, that makes sense. This is why I didn't have an issue talking to Charlie Kirk, despite his dehumanizing rhetoric of a bunch of different groups. Not because I think that that is appropriate or because it's my privilege showing, right? But because I understood that a lot of people shared his sentiment, and he was a beacon for this kind of ideology that, and not only was he a beacon for this kind of ideology, but he was also straightforwardly like a part of the Trump administration, right? So if tomorrow Nick Fuentes became Charlie Kirk, I would debate Nick Fuentes because there is value in doing that. Only because if they reach a level of prominence, like, you have to deal with it. You have to deal with the ideology. You have to dismantle it. You have to tackle it. Having said that, however, you are under no obligation to engage in sort of post-mortem whitewashing and legacy building for people who have engaged in that sort of commentary.
In my way through the question, I actually think that's not a hard line to draw. I think not calling people out of their name, I think that's actually a basic value that most people have. And I think people who think it's not, who are pushing that, are actually themselves on the other side of the line.
But so I want to hold on this for a minute, because I do think this is like a very
and that's
core
different
question.
From policy, Ezra.
Yeah, I understand it's different than policy.
That's different than policy.
I think that one just reality is the president of the United States is a person who, in his comportment as a human being on the public stage, I would have said in 08, in 12, in 16, should be on the other side of the line. I think he's a person who does not act with any sense of public or even personal decency.
Right.
And then he won in 16, lost sort of narrowly in 20 and then won in 2024. And I think the thing that has led to for me is recognizing that I don't get to draw the line. Now, it doesn't mean I don't have one in my own heart, but I think that is the thing that I am struggling with, which is not only is he clearly for most people, or a lot of people, plurality of the voters in the last election, not somehow way over the line. That means it's a lot of people who are willing to accept things that I thought we would have found unacceptable. Like, if you had told me, I would have thought that the way he acts in public is unacceptable, and it's not. And so I think for me, and this goes back to maybe the culture that you feel didn't exist, but I feel did, that there was a view that we could sort of work with politics with drawing these lines, that there are people going to be inside them and outside them, and we could work that way. I think that I am working with the question of what happens if you don't believe that, if you don't control the line. What I see is any line that existed at all collapsing. I'm watching Tucker Carlson turn into, what I would describe as a white nationalist and become an absolute...
Turn into? I'm sorry. What year is this? Is it 2025 or is it 2016? Is it 2012? Turn into is crazy.
On the right, bigger than he ever was in his, smarmy libertarian phase. And this stuff has real appeal, as you said, right? That's not a surprise on some level. It's just something you have to deal with.
But his smarmy libertarian phase was where he talked about Iraqis being primitive apes that deserve to be bombed back to the fucking Stone Ages. You know what I mean?
And so that's where this question of the line drawing, I have lines what I think should and should not be acceptable. Those lines clearly have no relationship to my country, the politics. And I think I've been asking the question without really having an answer. I want to be honest about this. What follows from that?
I think you do have a line.
I'm sure I do.
I think there are things, for instance, that I could say that would make you say it's no point in Ta-Nehisi coming up and being on this podcast. And likewise, there are things you could say. Obviously, I would say it's no point in me talking to Ezra.
Yeah. I'm saying, what happens if 35% of the country, 40% of the country, the dominant political force in the country is inside that? Does that change anything? Or no, the line just holds?
No. I mean, welcome to Black America. That's our history. The line we have drawn in general has not been majoritarian politics, unfortunately. That's just been what it is, And at the times that it's been majoritarian politics, people have done things and, fiddled with government or done, extremely violent things to make it not so, How
do you deal in that answer? How do you deal with Trump really substantially increasing his share of the black vote?
Actually, I think where he is about where actually Republicans tended to be before Barack Obama. So I'm a little less. There's a conservative portion of our community that's always voted Republican. And I think, obviously I think sexism is a very, very real force. I don't think it's completely explanatory, but the idea that there is, say, 20% of black men who are fundamentally conservative, that doesn't really surprise me too much.
But I guess let's take...
the other side of the story also, I think, this is my meta. I've brought this up to FD Signifier as well. But I think that the further you move away from the gains that Black people exhibited, that Black people saw in their own real lives during the civil rights struggle given to them by the Democratic Party, the more Black people decouple themselves as a reliable voting bloc of the Democratic Party. Now, of course, there's still a long way to go in terms of like a full decoupling, like Black people becoming like party agnostic. But there is a reason why younger Black men and even some younger Black women, but specifically younger Black men, find themselves not leaning on the Democrat Party vote in the same way that older Black men do, because they have not seen the modern Democratic Party make any inroads that seek to identify and directly help their communities. If the Democrats still carried the torch of the civil rights movement, I think this would be a non-starter. But the fact that they don't, I think, plays somewhat of a role. But as I've said, even when Obama was talking about like misogyny and yada yada yada, and talking about like, you know, Black men, you hate women, I think, or whatever the fuck I said over and over again, the hyper focus on the Black vote is silly, because Black men, Black women, obviously, Black women vote for the Democrats by Assad numbers. It's unheard of. But also Black men in general also are still fairly reliable voters of the Democratic Party anyway, and that any attention shifted away from the white population and the way that they vote back to like Black men and singling out Black men is in my opinion, a liberal version of the same, like liberal version of like calling into question Black people's loyalty to the Democratic Party. It's just like a liberal way of saying like, what's up with that? Did you say Assad numbers? Yes. Black women as a reliable voting bloc for the Democratic Party is so unimaginably high that it literally only exists in fake democracies like Vladimir Putin. Okay? Like it only, like it happens in this democracy, but it is the only example.
Because I think this is a hard case. I think from your perspective and from my perspective, we probably don't believe hugely different things. Mm-hmm. A huge amount of the country, right? A majority of the country believes things about trans people, about what policy should be towards trans people, about what language is acceptable to trans people, that like we would see as fundamentally and morally wrong. And what politically, not in a column or something, but politically, should our relationship with those people be? Do we win them over? Do we compromise with them? Like, this feels like a very salient question. The Republican Party is going to make sure this is a relentlessly salient question.
Right. I agree with that.
Where does the approach leave us? Right? Where do we go on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Look, I think a couple things. I think, again, look, my tradition is the only thing I have a reference point for, so I'm sorry to keep going back to this. But when I look at the times that we have lost...
This person just keeps saying, literally focus on affordability. Just focus on affordability and say their landlord isn't trans. Yes, I know.
If I think specifically about the Black tradition, for instance, it's hard for me to say politically they did something wrong. You know what I mean? Like, Reconstruction falls. What was the thing that should have been done? On the contrary, I see, you know, a kind of courage that I wish we had today in a lot of people. You know what I mean? I see people willing to die and take bullets all the time. You know what I mean? What more could Ida B. Wells have done, you know, to get the anti-lynching bill passed? I mean, here is somebody that, you know, was banished from Tennessee on threat of being killed after she saw her friends, you know, murdered and lynched. And one of the things I will say is, when I look back at that long tradition, and I look back in the times that people have won and the places they've won, it's often not been their heroism that was the decisive factor ultimately. It's often not been their strategy that was the decisive factor. Folks look back at the civil rights movement, for instance, and they talk about how brilliant it was to do the sit-ins and, you know what I mean, use mass media in the way that Martin Luther King used mass media, the appearance, all of that's true. But if we don't have World War II, you know what I mean, and the planet does not get a view of how horrific it can be when you decide you're going to eliminate people based on their traits, civil rights movement happened? I don't know. I think windows open and close. And so I think some of this is up to the decisions that politicians make. I think some of it is also up to what is happening in the broader mass culture at the time. I think all this kind of, you know, works together. I'm not against, you know, this kind of strategizing. That I think that has to happen. But I think you also have to recognize like how broad the world is when you say politics.
I think there's been a period, particularly on the left, in which the Civil War, pre it, post it, the writings of that time, the people of that time, have become a sort of a rooting period, a place where we sort of go back and look and think about who are we, what was revealed about us. I'm taking nothing away from that.
Right.
But that's obviously a period where politics ultimately fails. I actually think, and I've thought about this a lot in Reaction, I have read in the last couple of weeks, I thought a lot about how many people believe we are already in a cold civil war, that we are in a time that we are dealing with divisions and questions. I see it on the right, for sure. I hear it on the left. I have a lot of email that's like, we need a national divorce. How that's going to be effectuated, never exactly clear.
Do people
they do use that.
Do people you respect say that to you?
Well, yes, actually, I will say that. But I'm not going to, people say things to me that are off the record and I shouldn't say it. But you don't believe that though, right? You don't believe we are at a point. I think this is really important. I was curious what you would say to this question. You don't believe we are at a point where the next 10, 20, 30 years can be shaped. Decisions we would understand is within normal politics, within elections and legislation and organizing and so on.
No.
Good. I think that's great.
I mean, look, that could happen.
Yeah.
That could happen. But I guess the broader thing I am thinking about is how much does this era stand out in the long sweep of American history?
Yeah.
It's bad.
Well, so this is actually...
But it wouldn't make my list for the worst.
No, I agree with you. I'm where you are on this, to just be super clear.
Okay.
But I actually think one reason then the amount we focus on the Civil War period.
Yeah, he's framing the Civil War itself as a failure of politics. I argue that the war was politics itself is 100% correct. This is the problem with liberals, man. They just don't comprehend that like politics is a distribution of resources and power. Okay, that's what politics is. And he thinks politics is just like people chirping at one another, like a team sport or something. And that's not what this is. Politics is when podcast, politics is when debate.
Is tricky, is because that's a period when it didn't work like that, right? You actually had to go over the cliff of that and have the war. I've been thinking a lot about, because I've been reading a lot about McCarthyism. So I've been thinking about that whole period. And
he's like, I agree with it. No, I'm just kidding. He's going to be like, McCarthy has some good ideas.
You just sort of brought up the World War II as, sort of a generator of the politics that allows us to have the Great Society, the Civil Rights Act, et cetera. I think another way of sort of glossing that is you have the rise of Red Scare politics, which predate McCarthy. You have Joseph McCarthy, who is just for a period an unbelievably dominant force.
It's insane.
Everybody who challenges him loses.
That's right.
He becomes a complete kingmaker. He's eventually boxed out and beaten by...
Is he saying Joseph McCarthy was doing politics the right way? I'm going to fucking lose my mind, bro. Joseph McCarthy was doing politics the right way, just like Charlie Kirk.
Dwight Eisenhower, sort of center-right, very, very anti-communist politician, but who can sort of take the center from McCarthy. But then it's like, what happens next? Nixon, who is the genteel red baiter to McCarthy's non-genteel red baiter, runs in the next election. He's beaten by JFK, who's a very center-left, very anti-communist, sort of runs to Nixon's right on communism. And he does it with Lyndon Johnson, on the bottom of the ticket, sort of representing Southern politics in the Democratic Party. It's a very, very, in a way, checkered series of moves that are accepting huge amounts of McCarthyism at that time. And yet it does sort of lead to political power that is then wielded in a very, very different way within fairly short order. I take from this, I've been thinking about this because I think we're sort of in a new McCarthyism, some lessons on how politics can work and like the give and the take of it. We've been sort of brought up the Civil War a bunch, but what do you take from this period?
I take something that we've kind of been circling for this entire conversation, which is that the role of politicians and the role of writers, intellectuals, et cetera, is very, very different. Politicians do things that I wouldn't do. I don't, for instance, I don't hold JFK or RFK up, you know what I mean, as the people
me
I
neither.
would... Right. Yeah.
I'm not a fan of JFK Camelot revisionism.
But, I guess...
It's not a very good president.
That's like a separate thing from whether, you know what I mean, why politics happens the way they do. Let me give you an instance that often also comes up. That's not the Civil War, and that's the New Deal, right? Like, I think there is a pretty strong argument that the New Deal not a strong argument, but pretty clear that the New Deal did quite a bit to create the social safety net, create an American middle class, right? That's true. Did FDR want to, in his heart, exclude Black folks in the way that they were excluded from it? No. That was the price of getting the thing done. I understand that as politics. But were I there in that time, it would be incumbent on me to yell at FDR to not do that. And I just think that's really, 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 really important. We don't all have the same role. When I wrote Case for Reparations, it was not my expectation, nor did I even think it would be politically intelligent for like Barack Obama to go up and yell, "I'm for reparations." You know what I mean? But that's different than, you know what I mean, my role.
I guess the substructure of a bunch of what I am saying, which may or may not be in argument with you. It's just, right. When I texted you to come on, I was like, I've been thinking about what the underlying arguments are here. So you're kind of getting this spilling out of my brain. I think that there is a work of politics that for a bunch of different reasons has become demeaned. And I think, and this does not speak well of the people, so to speak, in power doing it, but I think that they are not doing it well. I think the culture around them. I think politicians are not always leaders. I think they're often followers. And
the crisis at the heart of liberalism is their inability to actually lead and constantly find themselves in a defensive posture against increasingly violent reactionary sentiment. Ezra Klein is quite literally advancing that same crisis every time he speaks on these issues and says, there is no other option. We just have to cower in fear. They are far too powerful. Someone like Zohran Mamdani obviously directly betrays this notion. And I don't know what his assessment of someone like Zohran Mamdani looks like. I don't think he's like outwardly anti-Zohran, for the record. He wouldn't dare. But I suspect that his analysis of Zohran probably leads to all the same wrong assessments that many prominent Democrats make. How big is Ezra's audience? Do people actually listen to this and get something? Ezra Klein is the lib whisperer, okay? Right now in this country, if there's one person that like all of the liberals in prominent positions of power listen to, I would say it's Ezra Klein. Like people who like the audience is not massive. If you were to fucking look around and ask your random friends who the fuck Ezra Klein is, random people that like work regular jobs and shit. No, he doesn't have that kind of motion, but it doesn't matter. He has, it's the same reason why I don't mind getting written up in the New York Times, because like people with prominence, people with institutional power read the New York Times and get their notes from the likes of Ezra Klein. And as that is his job, he does he plays that role very decently by constantly telling liberals in positions of power with a lot of wealth, they're not wrong, that economic arguments can only be done within the confines of neoliberalism and the public-private partnership, and that the way to win over more people is by going further and further right on social issues, as opposed to going further left on economic issues, which would most likely bring a lot more people from the said right flank of American politics back to voting for the Democrats. You're not wrong. My dad, who thought Kamala Harris went too far right, fucking loves abundance. Oh my God. Your dad is an abundist? That's crazy.
I think that the idea that kind of political coalition building across these gigantic differences, building across public opinion, both not just as you wish it existed, but as it exists, has become, seen and like treated as often betrayal, cowardice, moral fallibility. It's not, I think it's fine to say people got different roles. And in fact, it's good for intellectuals to criticize the politicians. My view is that the political practice became too weak. I don't think that was true for Obama. I went back preparing to talk to you and I read your piece. My president was black.
I saw this.
Yeah. It's a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
And it's very much in this tension, right? Where you say quite a bit, like it would have been a bad idea for Barack Obama to say the things I am saying here, to do the things in some ways I wish he had done. It would have been, that politics wouldn't have worked. There would have been no Obama presidency and his presidency would not have been successful. And I think I've been thinking about that line, right? In my own work and just in the political culture as I see it, that line between the sort of intellectual, analytical work and the actual like work of politics, the how do we live here with each other work, right? Which I think is actually honorable work. And I think feels right now to me like morally urgent and necessary. And not just over disagreement, just the whole thing being done in a strategic and disciplined sense. I think one of the things I've thought about is the need to actually raise the status of just like old-fashioned politics. And I think I've been surprised to find myself feeling that way. But I think one way the second Trump term has changed me is I don't, and maybe you always believe this, right? I'm not putting this on you. I think what got built for all of its flaws in the back half of the 20th century was much more fragile than I'd understood. Not just like the legislation or any of that, but the actual sense of like what you could and could not do, what we would and would not accept. And I've just like the sense that we could just tumble all the way back has become much more real to me. And so the work that people did to begin to build those guardrails and like how hard that actually was, and the disappointment we eventually, I feel like we began to take something actually quite beautiful for granted, or only see what wasn't there as opposed to what was. And it's forced a little bit of, for me, like, how did they do it? How did they get out of the last one of these?
I'll just say, and I think I'm speaking for a broader community here, we are not happy, but we are not surprised, man. And again, the reason why we go back to Reconstruction and the Civil War is because it is, before the 1960s, the only glimpse at the possibility of a real democracy in this country. And it happened. And in some places, it was actually quite successful. You have people who, had been enslaved, who are written off as illiterate fools, who, serving in legislatures. And actually, with the standard of the time, actually, it's such a hopeful, incredible story. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it was violently destroyed. once you see that and once you have that in your heritage, once you understand that, once you understand that Martin Luther King.
Ezra Klein is a Stalin quote given human form. You mean social democrats are social fascists? Is that what you're saying?
Could be standing up.
The problem is, I don't even think he's a social democrat. So I wish he was a social democrat, man.
Telling his own people, we do not embrace violence at all. It is morally repugnant. We embrace love. And that could get you shot. Not burn it down. Love can get you shot. You just have a different view of your country. It is not, I emphasize this over and over again, it is not a fatalistic view. It is not, it is written in stone that we will ultimately lose, but you understand that losing is a possibility.
But so then what does that, there's a Buddhist meditation I like. This is a weird place to go. But it goes like this. I'm of the nature to grow sick. I'm of the nature to grow old. I'm of the nature to lose the people I love. I'm of the nature to die. How then shall I live? And
love that.
Yeah, I do it because sometimes you need the reminder. Yeah. What I hear you saying in a way is we are of the nature too. And I think the place I'm trying to push is then, how then shall we live? Because in this distinction you're making between, like, you would have been there correctly yelling at FDR. And I'm not like asking you, but like me, right? Like my work, my role.
Can you answer that? Can you say I think it's a good point. Would you define for me how you see, like, what your role is?
I don't know what my role is anymore. I'll be totally honest with you, man. I feel very conflicted about that question. The role I want to have is a person curiously exploring his political and intellectual interests in political peacetime. And the role I somehow have is sometimes that. I am in the business, I'm a political opinion writer and podcaster and so on. And I'm in the business of political persuasion. And I feel like me and the people who believe what I believe, not narrowly speaking, but, like the whole broad coalition, have failed in a really consequential way. And I think it is.
You feel like you failed in your work?
I think there are places I failed. I mean, I think there are things I got right too. Like,
yes, you did. I mean, it's true. You did objectively. The Democratic Party has been abiding by the Ezra Klein worldview, not singularly responsible, right? Ezra is not singularly responsible for this. No one is. But the Democratic Party has been actively positioning himself in the exact ways that Ezra wants them to, whether because they listen to him or not, doesn't matter. Like, that is what the output is of the Democrats. So in some ways, yes, I think this is a massive failure, for sure. And I would go so far as to say that, like, Ezra Klein, Matty Iglesias, these guys are almost reactionary in the way that they identify, they follow the lead of those in power, and they actively try to normalize the ways in which the power structure should not be harmed in any capacity. The hierarchy should remain the same, and work within the confines of permission, where they just say, like, yeah, things are getting really bad. Here's how the Democrats could win, and therefore maybe potentially put a stay of execution on American fascism happening. If fascism is the execution of American democracy, then the only way to do that is by just pausing that slow burn towards fascism, or the accelerated pace of moving the direction of fascism. There's no vision there, I think, of a better future. There's no vision of, like, undermining the existing hierarchies. There's no alternative vision whatsoever.
I think we shouldn't have run Joe Biden again. I think I was right about that. I think I've gotten a lot right, but I think I've gotten definitely things wrong. But I think we are here now, right? That's what I would really say. And it is forcing me to rethink things I would prefer not to rethink. I will give you an example because people are mad at me on this one right now. Please. I said in a podcast with my colleague Russ Douthat, he was pushing me on left radicalism. I was saying, I don't care about left-wing radicalism. I don't think it's some great threat. I don't think it's a huge political problem. I worry about left-wing pessimism, fatalism, that we are losing and don't want to change anything. And I said that the question for me is, how do we win Senate seats in places like Kansas and Missouri and Ohio? I said, I would like to see us doing things like in red states, and here I meant redder than those, running pro-life candidates. People got real upset about that, and I get why. But in 2010, when the Affordable Care Act passed, there were 40 House Democrats who were pro-life at some level. You had to do this whole negotiation with this guy, Bart Stupak.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And on the bright side, you don't have to have those negotiations now. And on the downside, you can't pass the Affordable Care Act. And the point is not that issue, right? That one issue, although things like, the example, say, Susan Collins, where she's in theory pro-choice, but she votes for Mitch McConnell and John Thune as leader. Right. Like, that's how you build power on some level, right? If you have those, Joe Manchin, like, I wish he were still a senator from West Virginia, as much as I have deep disagreements with him. I think that I am.
Joe Manchin's position as a Democrat senator from West Virginia only works if the party has the interest of whipping his votes. If he benefits from being a spoiler more than he benefits from working in tandem with the party, then his D next to his name is only there for him to be more valuable as an infiltrator. Okay? This is a major issue. Joe Manchin, as a Republican from West Virginia, would be meaningless. He'd be in a grand sea of other Republicans. He would not get the same looks from think tanks. He would not get the same amount of money from interest groups. He is only valuable as a Democrat, and he knows that.
I'm a person, I think you are a person, whether you admit it or not, who is one of the people with a, voice in shaping what our political culture is. And I believe at some level that political strategy is downstream from political culture. I think it means exploring things that are uncomfortable and being pretty disciplined in a way maybe I haven't been, about separating the question of what I believe from what I believe will win power. Because I currently think that the cost of losing power is horrifying and dangerous, and we can't keep doing it. So that's...
There it is. This was what I clocked as his opinion. Democrats have to concede on social conservatism and run spoilers like Joe Manchin instead of winning a broad coalition, because as long as the Democrats are in charge, things are not as bad as they would be as opposed to the Republicans in charge. Look no further than what's happening right now. This is the argument that a lot of Democrat dead-enders present as though it's some sort of brilliant analysis that we are unfamiliar with, right? Democrats winning for the sake of Democrats winning alone is a worthwhile goal, no matter how they win. And the most exaggerated counterexample to this would be, okay, what if they just embodied every single policy position of the Republican Party with the exception of like one or two, and they won that way? Would that still be success? Especially when there is a different alternative out there, when there's an alternative vision out there seemingly that people are responding positively to, democratic socialism, for example. I think a lot of Dems do unironically think that, though, where they just think, like a lot of Dem voters think that as long as there's a D next to it, if they exhibit the same tendencies and the same ideological background of like the average Republican, then it's fine. It's good. It's better to have a Democrat there than a Republican.
Yeah, so can we start with that exactly? Because the immediate thing, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the immediate thing that springs to mind for me in that question is not who you're abandoning, but how do you square the fact that, in fact, reproductive rights has proven to be pretty popular in red states. Yeah. And I'm thinking about referendums that have been passed such that they've had to, change the rules. Like, how do you separate that?
I sort of said this in glancingly.
Like, there are people who didn't vote for Kamala, but give me my reproductive rights.
I think that I was using first pro-life as an illustrative example, but there are many red districts in this country, and there are states that we do not even think about competing in anymore, right? I'm not talking about Ohio here. I think you have to try things. By the way, not only moderation kind of things.
There is not a single red state where there needs to be a pro-life Democrat running. There's not a single red state where there needs to be an anti-trans Democrat running. The thing that we should be trying is the thing that the Democrats refuse to try, because the Democrats have already tried and failed with militaristic, jingoistic sentiments, with by running, fucking military veterans being like, we're the real patriots, all this shit. The thing that Democrats haven't tried is unironically left populism, left economic populism. They haven't tried it. And as a matter of fact, they actively stamp it out. Okay. There are examples of liberals who have won and won big due to their lineage and their familial name, like Andy Bashar, whose father was a part of like institutional politics in the state, things of that nature. And he obviously is uncompromising when it comes to social principles, when it comes to social liberalism. Even then, okay, there are a couple examples of the left populism that's actually panned out quite successfully, but not enough. Democrats are clearly shy about that, or they have some kind of resistance to that kind of messaging.
Try going much harder on economic populism, which some people are trying. I think you might need to combine those two strategies, right? Which is sort of the Dan Osborne in Nebraska approach. I think that you...
So he's saying that left populism should be a strategy that's tried as long as you package it with social conservatism.
I think even before the question of what your policies are, and I believe this very deeply, there's a question of whether or not people feel like you respect them and like them, even if they disagree with you. Before I think people will give you power, they don't even ask, do they like you? They ask whether you like them. And I think a lot of the country feels we don't like them. I believe that I know that. I've seen the focus groups. I've seen the survey data. I've talked to the people who work on this. And that's going to require, changing that is going to require making moves that somehow send a loud enough signal that people begin to think we have changed at some level. Sherrod Brown should be able to win in Ohio.
Yes.
The reason he cannot win in Ohio is the Democratic Party itself is a millstone around his neck that drags him down. So what do you do about it?
That's true. Okay, examine that further. What is the millstone? Is it the pro-trans stuff or is it the neoliberalism? Because Sherrod Brown is a winning politician in Ohio because he is an outspoken union man. And he doesn't go far enough in terms of like his own ideas of where Medicare should go. I think he's like in favor of Medicare expansion. But exactly the qualities that Sherrod Brown has that make him marketable in fucking Ohio is the left populist policies that he advances. That's it. And the thing that actually puts him underwater in a place like Ohio is not the fact that the Democrats are seen as like being too pro-trans or anything. The only reason why people hyper-focus on that shit is because the Democrats themselves are not aligned with Sherrod Brown on being uncompromisingly pro-labor union or even like pushing the boundaries of what is permissible in terms of left economic populism. That's it. And even Sherrod Brown himself, actually, in my opinion, was nowhere near as aggressive on that front.
Here to tell you I got the answer.
Yeah.
What I would feel much better about is I feel there was like a strategic discipline about finding it.
So I just if you will take this very gentle pushback.
Yeah, please.
I think
you're here for it.
I haven't seen exactly what people are saying, online in terms of this, but I do think like what immediately strikes me is if you take, I know you would just, it's not, the example necessarily that you would hold out, about reproductive rights, but I think the problem with musing about that is abandoning it is a very real possibility for people who don't have the option necessarily to fly to another state or do X, Y, and Z. So I suspect when they hear somebody of your status, even if it's not the example you mean, putting it out in the air, like they feel, and it's not just that you're putting it out in the air, it's putting it out in the air. And actually, I don't necessarily even mean that one. No, like if you're going to say that, I think you really got to,
I'll stand behind it.
You got to put the data behind it. I think that's really, really important.
I will say, and I think this is actually the nub of it, right? Like I'm glad we're sort of here. I am saying the thing it sounds like I'm saying. To be very, very clear.
Right.
I think in a place like Nebraska, you should try to run some pro-life Democrats. I wish people, instead of saying that an express...
That's so dumb. No, it's not. It's not a winning position in Nebraska. It's not. Like maybe he's just wrong. Okay. He's just wrong on that issue. Like, I don't mean like, oh, I'm biased towards the pro-choice position. Like, I mean like objectively, he's fucking wrong. There is no region in this country where Democrats have to be pro-life. You can even make this argument about being anti-trans, right? But you can't make this argument about pro-life or pro-choice. And even when you're talking about anti-trans, you don't have to make that argument at all. It is a coward's argument to make because there are far more gains that you can make by presenting a left populist economic message and move people's attention away from trans issues, okay? That's my argument. You have to give Republicans something to fight for, or something to fight against, rather. That's at the heart of the politics of the reactionary, is like they have to constantly undermine gains that you're making. And in the absence of something to fight against, they just claw back pre-existing civil rights. And we have, unfortunately, post-Reagan, in the period of unprecedented, unfettered neoliberalism, have redesigned American politics to follow the lead of the Republicans.
Or strategic question in politics was betraying or abandoning the people we wish to protect. I wish what we said was we lost power in a way that allowed Donald Trump to drive the Supreme Court to a 6-3 Republican majority. And that majority overturned Roe v. Wade. Right. It overturned Roe v. Wade and actually abandoned all these people.
Right. See, that's what he's saying. If Democrats still actually had run pro-life candidates, like, then Republicans would never be able to win and overturn Roe v. Wade. Except they overturned Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court when a Democrat was president. From August 29th, 2024, the Democrats are once again running the old strategy of triangulating to the center and running scared, talking about picking up Nikki Haley voters, highlighting a Republican cabinet pick, and pushing the right-wing border bill, forgetting what caused their early momentum. The method is clear. They think not being Biden is enough to win back some of the younger, more progressive demos as they spend the rest of the 60-plus days trying to communicate to Trump holdouts instead of running on progressive issues that help all Americans.